Hey, what's up? I'm Seth, and this is What Movies Teach, the movie review channel where I look at a movie's themes and content, ultimately to decide if it's a movie I'm comfortable sharing with my kids. Okay, today we're looking at movie number 2 of Phase 2 of the Marvel Cinematic Universe. This movie comes after Iron Man 3, and it's Thor the Dark World. Okay, so watching Thor 2, I had seen it before and I was watching a second time. All the movies I'm watching these days, I always have this question, is this a movie I would be comfortable sharing with my kids, sitting down with them and watching it with them and not having those feelings like, I shouldn't have shown them that. I'm trying to see if this movie has that. And so that big question, would I share this movie with my kids? You know, right off the bat, I'm going to say that I would share this movie with my 10 and my 12-year-old, and here's why. When I'm analyzing a movie, I first think about what did I walk away with from this movie? What was the big things that stuck with me? What were the themes and the lessons? So whether you've seen this movie or not, I'm going to talk about the lessons in it, and that usually is a bit of a spoiler, so spoiler alert. What stuck with me, what I walked away with right initially after watching this movie is that I enjoyed it, it was fun, the action was good, the story was good, and I liked the camaraderie, the relationships that went on with the characters. At the same time, I didn't feel like it was one that made a huge difference to my life. I didn't learn like some great big things. So let me get into the synopsis really quick. So after the events of the Avenger, Thor's gone back to Asgard, he took Loki there, Loki's in prison now, and Thor's out protecting his corner of the universe. They call it the 9 realms. It's like 9 different planets or areas that they have a connection to. I don't really know all the details, and they don't explain it super clearly, but Thor uses his space bridge, the Bifrost they call it, to go to these different planets and these different areas in the galaxy to save people, to rescue them, to bring order to the galaxy. That's what he's doing. So he's a protector, and he's a strong protector. Everywhere he goes, he cleans things up and he's helpful, and that's great. So I think that's the big main theme of this movie is that, you know, if you have the power, you should be protecting people. Now, we kind of saw that in the first movie, and we've seen that in other Marvel movies. And so they just continue with that theme in this movie. But then we see that Thor has actually been putting off what he wants to protect people. And that's the next kind of lesson I got out of this movie is sometimes you have to put off what you want to get the job done first. It's like, you know, going to work and then you get the weekends. The work comes first. And so Thor's out protecting people, he's saving people. He wants to be with Jane back on Earth, the girl he met in the first Thor movie, but he's putting that off because he has to bring order to his corner of the galaxy. Meanwhile, though, Jane is a scientist, and she's super curious, and this curiosity helps get her in trouble. It did in the first movie where she saw, you know, the Bifrost coming down. She's like, we gotta go check it out. They do, and they run into Thor, and that's what starts the story. So in this movie, she is detecting some anomalies. She goes to this scary warehouse. She hears some noises. She follows that curiosity. That's what she's always doing is, you know, for science. If it's scary, it doesn't matter. We're doing it for science. And so she follows kind of these noises she hears. She gets sucked into this other dimension, this other part of the 9 realms. And while she's there, she absorbs this super powerful weapon called the Ether. And while she's doing that, Thor is trying to kind of keep an eye on her. He's got this friend that can actually see almost anything in the galaxy. And he loses her. And he doesn't know where she's at. Thor freaks out. And so he goes to Earth. So this is kind of the catalyst. This is what starts the story of this movie. Jane has the Ether inside her. It's this big weapon. Thor's there to protect her and help her. He can tell that something is inside her and something's not quite right, and he wants to get that fixed. And then off in the galaxy, these dark elves awaken. So we actually saw this whole prologue before the beginning of the movie where there was this Lord of the Rings style battle with the Asgardians and the Dark Elves, where the Dark Elves were just trying to get the Ether. They just wanted that weapon so that they could take over the universe with darkness, so they could make everything dark, no light. That's kind of their main goal. It's a little one-dimensional, but that's what they wanted to do. So then Thor breaks all the rules of Asgard and brings a human there, but it's because it's okay to break rules if it's for the greater good. That's another big lesson we get in this movie because at this point, Thor breaks the rules to take Jane to Asgard. They find out that she has the Ether and they need to help her. But Thor continues to break the rules because the Dark Elves come to Asgard. They attack. The Asgardians don't do very well. Thor suffers a great loss when his mother tries to protect Jane. So after their attack and they have this great loss, you see Odin is kind of in this slump. He doesn't want Thor to pursue revenge. He doesn't want Thor to leave Asgard. And Thor sees that he needs to leave Asgard to be able to save their people and kind of take on the offensive, to be able to then prevent another attack. So he breaks the rules again. He thinks the most intelligent thing to do is to break Loki out of prison, because Loki knows how to get around to the 9 realms, get to these other planets without using the Bifrost, without breaking Father's rules. And so, yeah, he breaks Loki out of prison, the guy who just tried to kill him multiple times, tried to take over the world, killed a bunch of people, but this seems like the smartest thing. And the most interesting part of this is that it is really fun when he breaks Loki out of prison. Man, Tom Hiddleston does such a great job. Anytime Loki's in the scene, it's fun. Their banter is fun. He's witty. You know he shouldn't be trusted, but he's also kind of likable and clever and funny. And so you see Thor break the rules a couple of times, and I feel like that was almost a lesson, is that it's okay to break the rules if it's for the greater good, if it's for something you really believe in and you know it's going to work. So then you see that, Loki's able to help Thor and Jane actually go find the Dark Elves' hideout. That was his whole goal, is to find out where they were and then go attack them there. While they're there, they're able to pull the ether out of Jane, which has kind of been hurting her, so they're glad to do that. They try and destroy the ether, but that doesn't work. The Dark Elves actually get it, which is unfortunate. And then you see in the situation that it's Thor and Loki and Jane. You think Loki's going to betray them the whole time. They actually put on this whole act where Loki has betrayed Thor. He comes up to the Dark Elves and says, "Here, I got Thor for you," but that's actually an act, and he's actually still on Thor's side. And then you see that Loki almost gets killed by the Dark Elves, and Thor jumps in and saves him before he kills him, basically sacrifices himself to save Loki. They kind of look at each other, don't say anything, and they're like, okay, whatever. And then Loki later tries to save Thor and sacrifices himself. He actually gets stabbed, and we think he dies. He doesn't, again. Even from the first movie, he didn't die, and from this movie, he doesn't die. But you think he does. And you see another great lesson that, family's worth sacrificing for. Even if they hate you, even if they try to kill you, you should still do what's right and try and save them. Yeah, so that's another lesson I got out of it. Okay, so we think Loki's dead. Thor and Jane go back to Earth. They fight the Dark Elves with science, with magic, and you see that the ether is really super powerful, but with science and magic, they win the day. So here's the interesting thing about this movie. It is a lot of fun. And the reasons that I would show it to my kids, I would share it with my kids, at least my 10 and my 12-year-old. I feel like my 5 and my 7-year-old maybe wouldn't be as interested, just because it's still that kind of Shakespearean feel, and I don't know if they would really have a lot of fun in it yet. And there also is a little bit of heavier content in this movie. I actually do feel like it's a little more violent. So talking about the content, the violence is, more than the first movie. There are some big battles in the beginning, and you see a lot of bodies. There's a lot of dead people. I feel like it's almost historic violence is kind of what I'd call it. There's not blood, but there's battle scenes. There is stabbing, and it's kind of pulled back. You don't see a lot of grim gore, but you see that they're fighting and people are dying. You get the understanding that this is a tough situation. It's not glorified at all. You don't think, oh, this battle is great. You think, oh, this stinks and this war is awful. There's other violence. I mean, the Dark Elves, anytime they're around, they are killing Asgardians, or the Asgardians are killing the Dark Elves. There's no blood, but there is shooting. There is stabbing. There is one scene where you think Thor gets his arm chopped off. There's no blood, but you see the bone and you see the muscle just for a second, and it's kind of disturbing, but then you find out that that's an illusion. And so, yeah. And then at the very end, Malekith, the main Dark Elf, he's absorbed the ether, and Thor is actually destroying pieces of him. Like, his arm comes off, and his other arm comes off. It's not bloody gory, but it's a little maybe disturbing, and the arms come off because of science, but then they grow right back because he's super powerful. So there's not really that, oh, that's awful. It's just like, oh, he's trying to defeat him. So violence, yes, it's a little bit higher. I might do a little bit of editing for my 10-year-old. The language is not even really noticeable. There is a little bit of sexualization, and it's of Thor. You see him with his shirt off, washing his hands after a battle and everything, and the camera kind of lingers on him. I've talked about the sexualization of women in some of the Iron Man movies. In this movie, they sexualize Thor. It's just for a second, but again, that's something, you might want to talk about. Okay, so overall, what did I think of this movie? Yes, it is a movie that I would share with my kids because of a couple of things. One, the lessons are good. They're not great. They're not super strong. You don't see this huge arc for Thor. You see him start off protecting everybody with his great power, and at the end, he determines that, yes, I'm going to protect everybody with his great power. He does whatever it takes in the middle. He makes sure that he continues to do it, even though things get really hard and sad for him, but there's no real arc there. There's no change. And so I guess the main reasons that I would share this movie with my kids is it is a fun story. It does still fit in the Marvel Cinematic Universe. But because it's in the Marvel Cinematic Universe, and what happens in this movie will help you understand things that'll happen in another movie, and because it's fun, and I feel like it still has good lessons, and the violence is, tolerable. That's why I'm okay with sharing this movie with my kids. And that's just me. That's because I understand my kids, I understand what affects them, what they've seen already, and kind of the understanding they have of especially like fantasy violence. If I was to put an arbitrary age on this movie, I don't think it's quite PG-13. I think it's a little more tame than that. I think it's about an 11 to 12-year-old. Again, for my 10-year-old, I'd probably still let him watch it. I might just do a little bit of editing, but I'm actually okay with that. I grew up with watching movies on TV where they were always edited. So after watching Thor 2, even though it wasn't a super strong movie, there are some good questions you could ask. You could ask, actually, why do you think Thor went out of his way to save Loki, even though Loki's tried to kill him multiple times? And was that a good idea? I think another question I would ask is, that overall theme of, with great power comes great responsibility. Thor just is always helping people. I might ask my kids, what would you do in Thor's position? If you had Thor's power, Thor's hammer, what would you do with your life? Okay, that's it. That's Thor 2. That's a movie that I thought was okay. For me, honestly, if I was to rank the Marvel Cinematic Universe movies, I think this one's right at the bottom for me. It's still a good movie, if you want to classify it as a good movie. It's still fun. It's still funny. It's just not a standout great movie. And there's a lot of great movies in the Marvel Cinematic Universe. Let me know what you thought of this movie if you've seen it already, what you've learned if you've learned something different. Like this video if you like this review. If you like this channel, then hit subscribe, and I'll talk to you next time.